certainly sounds like we're going to stick to 12 teams in 2026, and there will not be an immediate expansion of the 12-team playoff to the 16-team playoff, mostly because the Big Ten and the SEC are pulling rank. Let's talk about what that means for the Big Ten, the SEC, what that means for college football, and why we can't all just, Reginald O'Denny get along. What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a stat mill. If this is your first time watching Adapt and Respond, thank you for joining us here. We talk college football year round. If that is something you're into, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like this video, and answer the question in the comments below. Can we get the Big Ten and the SEC to play 9 conference games and commit to a 5+11 format where the conference champion is the only automatic entry into the field from each conference? I know it's a long-winded question, but I feel like I know your answer is going to be all of 2 letters. And neither one of them begins with Y or ends with S. I understand where the SEC and the Big Ten are coming from because you are representing your league, 16 members in the SEC, 18 members of the Big Ten, and you are trying to enforce a memorandum of understanding, something like a contract, where you get the majority of the say in what the college football playoff format will be. Now, Greg Sankey's already shown that he's a little bit sensitive about how the SEC is perceived over the last couple of years because the Big Ten has won the national championship 2023, 2024, and more importantly, the SEC has not played in the national championship game since 2022. Last year, they watched SMU get a spot that they felt belonged to Alabama. It didn't matter that Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas got in. It felt like 1/3 of the field should have been represented by the SEC as Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State all got in to the college football playoff. Okay. SMU, Boise State felt like outliers. Arizona State felt like it's right where it should be, and Notre Dame is Notre Dame. Okay? Nobody's really upset about those things. I think the extra team gives you another chip to play with, gives you another token to put into the slot machine to play through the tournament and win the national championship. And the reason that we are arguing about how many teams you get in is not just because who gets to win the national championship, but by each win you get, adds more money to the pot from the $7.6 billion that ESPN is paying to televise college football playoff to your individual conference, or if you're Notre Dame, Notre Dame. It really is about money at this point. It's always been about money, though. We're not arguing about what's best for college football right now, because if we were doing that, we'd be having a totally different conversation. One where the Big Ten and the SEC don't get to tell everybody else what to do, but that's the world we live in. That's what it is, right? This is why, in this particular instance, the Big Ten, the SEC, that's your executive branch. Okay? All right? The Congress, that's all us. We can't get nothing done. You know what I'm saying? And the judicial branch remains judicial branch, and they ain't got no reason to get involved just yet. But I assure you they will. Just take a look at House versus NCAA. If we can't figure it out, we will ask judges in black robes tell us what to do. I really wish it doesn't come to that, and I don't think it will in the playoff, right? How we decide our national champion has always been ridiculous and stupid. The one time that we're trying to do it right is the time for which we find gridlock. A mythical national champion always got under my skin. As a child, I play baseball. I love baseball, right? College football, baseball. It's just, I get more out of talking about college football than I do about, whip, OPS. And there's just more games, and, I'm scoring a baseball game, and baseball is a different sport for me than football. Let's put it that way. However, when I played Dixie Youth, when I played at R.L. Turner in Little League, LLWS as opposed to Dixie League, right? Dixie Youth. When I played high school ball, we got tournaments to define who the champ is. We didn't have no friggin' tournament until 2014 in a sport that's more than 150 years old. So now we're trying to do it. We're trying to do it right. The majority shareholders are trying to protect their majority interests. So we get word from Brett McMurphy on 3 that the Big Ten is not likely to support a 5+11 format of any kind unless we get the SEC to play in 9 conference games. So why is the conference games part of this a sticking point? Well, because the SEC gets one more cupcake on its schedule than everybody else. Because they get one more cupcake on their schedule than everybody else, they have an inflated win-loss record compared to us. This is where baseball is actually a little bit further ahead. ERA should not be just what the ERA is. It should be adjusted to the average of the league. That's why WAR matters. Now, nobody plays with WAR on the back of their friggin' jersey, but we're talking about runs above replacement in 2025, not in 2014. That's asinine, okay? Like, I don't... You introduce a little bit of nuance to a conversation, and everybody, Heath Ledger Joker, loses their minds. Because apparently we stopped thinking. Making a blanket statement is an easy thing to do as a sports talk show host. It's not the hardest thing in the world. When you can do the math on a notepad and demonstrate that, it's powerful because you're making people believe that something really is simple that is much more nuanced than you think. Some of y'all have your woman or your man's come home and tell you about their day. And their day probably revolves around bosses like this, boss kind of sucks, this employee kind of sucks, colleague kind of sucks, I wish it wasn't that way. As the spouse, as the boyfriend, girlfriend, as significant other, as the side piece, you don't get to say, well, damn, you should just go tell them off. Because that'd be the simplest thing to do, right? That'd be the simplest thing to do. It would be, hey, go to your colleague, go to your boss, and tell them what's what. You know, it's not that hard to not eat the thing that's labeled Cheryl in the refrigerator if your name ain't Cheryl, okay? You should tell that to them, to which you probably gonna get, you're gonna get the eye. You're gonna get the eye, and if you lucky, you might just get to sleep on the couch. If you're not lucky, you might get kicked out the house. Because it's not that simple, right? There's nuance involved in here. There's interpersonal relationships that have to be ongoing. These are the things that keep our social mores in check. This is the reason why being a sports talk show host, you get to go, hey, here's how much the asset player, I hate that. Here's how much the asset is worth. All you do is deduct this from what you were going to pay, and then all of a sudden the asset is valuable again. No, because people are people, dummy. And when we start treating people like they don't matter, we lose their interest. And when we lose their interest, they don't want to give us their money. Because that's the part of this that I think is really getting under people's skin is the money's so big that for us regular people, you talking about millions and billions got us feeling some kind of way because that's life-changing money. Put another way, Brian Kelly was able to throw $1 million at the 2025 LSU roster because he got that. Some people will never see $1 million in their entire life. Most people will not see $1 million in their entire life. So for you to just kind of be able to kick that in, write that off, that's not going to hit the way you think it's going to hit with most people. LSU fans think it's great because they just want to win. But that's just it, though. That's all you get as a fan. You don't get no national championship ring. You don't get no bonus. You don't get no money for playing. All you get to do is say, my team is better than your team. And when the calculus for that gets to be so offsides and ridiculous that we're having an argument about, hey, SEC, just play the same number of conference games everybody else, 9. And they're going, no, our ACC schedule is harder than your 9-game conference schedule. Eat it. No, we can't all get along. By the way, I led with that Reginald O'Denny quote because if y'all do y'all history on that, do you remember what happens after he says that or before he said that? No? Well, the college football version is Georgia TCU 2022, and he was not Georgia.